Computer manufacturer Dell is best known for its approach of selling directly to its customers in order to reduce the cost of IT. But more recently, the company has changed its emphasis to include working with the channel and also developing more of its own technology. Joining me now from Dell is Aamir Paul, who is the Director for Small and Medium-Sized Business for Advanced Systems. Aamir, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Before we look specifically at Dell's strategy for the small and mid-sized business marketplace, I think it's probably worth spending a little bit of time looking at some of the top-level trends affecting smaller companies and the way that they buy and manage their IT infrastructure. I mean, how would you say, for example, at the moment, that IT is being used among smaller businesses?
I think small businesses struggle with the same challenges as large businesses, and as large percentages of their spend are going towards maintenance. So we estimate about 70% of every dollar it's spent on IT infrastructure is spent on keeping things on, getting those last minute fixes in place. And while that helps keeping their infrastructure going, it doesn't create disruptive or scalable innovation for small businesses. So I think moving money from maintenance and immediate requirement fixes to a plan that helps the business scale, provide better customer experience, lower cost, I think that's the big challenge small businesses are facing. In addition, you compound that with the complexities of the cash flow challenges and the constraints in capital expenditure, and it's a tough time, and I think it's important for us to provide better solutions, which we think we're doing.
Would you say it's true that smaller businesses are more dependent on IT than perhaps they ever have been?
I think so. I think when you come to the notion of innovating without boundaries, when you come to the notion of small businesses aspiring to do incredible things and not just come in and drive new business processes but disrupt industries, then I think IT is a great equalizer, if you like. I think it allows innovation to scale through and disrupt business models and allow that entrepreneurial spirit that a lot of small businesses started with to really seep through. We do a lot of work in terms of awarding small businesses that do interesting things and use IT in interesting ways. And one of our award winners a few years ago was a company called Wiggly Wigglers, and they sell worms. Now, how far from IT can you get in terms of a company that grows and sells worms? But guess what? With that very core, very old-fashioned business model, they combined social media, they combined a blog, they combined an element with which customers could interface with each other. They created community forums, and all of a sudden this business by this fantastic and energetic entrepreneur was more about using social media, doing something as agricultural as growing worm.
If you take a business like that as an example, what is the most important thing for them in their IT infrastructure at the moment?
I think there's basics. So there's basics like how prepared are you in terms of disaster recovery. We estimate about 60% to 70% of SMBs have some sort of catastrophic data loss every year. And that can be substantive. Downtime is just as important for SMBs. I think you hear these figures about downtime requirements of large banks, large enterprises. Of course those are important, but proportionally they're just as important for SMBs. And I think that same focus and energy in terms of redundancy and robustness of infrastructure becomes very important. I think once you get past that basic infrastructure of what are you trying to do with your application set, how are you trying to service your internal customers, what is the customer experience and what the processes you're trying to enable, and how robust is your infrastructure. The next step then becomes ease of access, availability. Can you run a 24/7 business without having people available 24/7?
How do investment levels among SMEs compare to investment levels in larger businesses? And do you say smaller businesses spend enough proportionally to their turnover?
I think broadly, yes. You'll always have variances, and depending on the sector they're in, you'll see variances depending on their business models. But I think I'll go back to my point about where they spend the money. I think planning, it's a hard thing to do. I talk to small businesses all the time, and they have resource constraints, and their CFO and their CEO and their managing director and head of services are all the one guy and or gal, and so the constraints on their time are immense. But it's a vicious cycle, and I think when I talk to customers, the one advice I give them is, whether it's with us or anybody else, plan ahead. Work through your core fundamental 4 or 5 pillars of your business that you're trying to improve on. Is it cost? Is it process? Is it customer experience? Is it an expansion of your product set? And then bleed back in what your IT requirements and your infrastructure will have to do to keep up with that. too often the business priorities or the customer experience priorities are developed and managed and executed, and then they come to this injection point where they want to go live and they need infrastructure, and they spot buy, and they buy at a time where they're not quite sure how it'll all come together, and they bring someone in or they try and do it themselves. And I think while, again, it's understandable, that creates problems of an infrastructure that doesn't scale, that isn't resilient, and ultimately where you compromise in the vision of what you're trying to do because you haven't thought about your infrastructure as part of that core business build-out process.
Is there a case that you could actually bring forward investment in IT and that would have a beneficial effect on either the top or bottom line, preferably both, in that same time period? So by spending some money on technology now, you will drive cost out of the business or bring opportunities to the business you wouldn't otherwise be able to capture?
Yes, I think so. I think it goes back to how closely your infrastructure spend is tied back to your core processes. So if you decide that customer experience is very important, and the ability for customers to interact with your tech support requirements and get support on your product per se is very important. And today you do that entirely over the phone or through some sort of channel partner. You want to create a online support environment. Then you can start mapping that back to exactly the cost of your support. How many contacts can you resolve online? Therefore, you don't need someone on the phone. And you can build an infrastructure investment plan on the back of that. So the closer you understand your business process and you understand what part of it you're trying to automate, speed up, make more available, make more scalable, the better you can track your infrastructure spend back. It goes back, and I'm going to keep going on about this, is how much we can do to help small businesses integrate their planning process. Because if they get that right, the secondary benefits are massive. If you do point and need acquisitions, whether it's infrastructure or even physical capacity, that return investment gets more complicated. I think the other thing to think about is how the technology itself scales. We have servers now that just in one generation are half in terms of power usage, so twice as efficient. We have storage capacity that is exponentially growing, and so is the data requirement, but we're keeping up with it. And I think those sort of movements can also have a disproportional impact, because go back to where your IT budget is caught. It's caught in maintenance. So if we can offer a hardware architecture that is easier to live with, then we release that maintenance money that then go back into business innovation. And then that's what we're trying to do.